She kept receipts.
We can get 2 junior marketing coordinators for your salary. John Goldson smirked across the conference table, adjusting his Hermes tie like he was delivering a Christmas bonus instead of a termination notice. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching this 38-year-old MBA with his perfectly coiffed hair and designer glasses explain to me, Carole Cohen, 49, senior marketing operations manager who'd built Yardi Property Group's entire customer retention infrastructure from scratch, why I was suddenly expendable. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The conference room smelled like stale coffee, and the ego of men who'd never had to worry about being replaced by cheaper models. Linda Martinez from HR sat to John's left, clutching her folder like a security blanket, avoiding eye contact. Nothing personal, just restructuring, John continued, his voice carrying that practiced tone of someone who delivered this speech before. Apex Residential is focused on operational efficiency. Operational efficiency. Corporate speak for we're gutting everything that works to make the numbers look pretty for the next quarter. I nodded slowly. I see. That was it. No tears, no pleading, no desperate questions about my daughter's college tuition or my mortgage payments. Just 2 words that seemed to deflate John's satisfaction like a punctured balloon. He'd expected drama, maybe some crying, definitely begging. Instead, he got the same calm professionalism I'd shown for 16 years while he and his Wharton cronies played musical chairs with corner offices. The severance package is generous, Linda finally spoke up, sliding a manila folder across the polished table. 2 months' salary, plus your accrued vacation time. I opened the folder, scanned the numbers. It was barely enough to cover Emma's spring semester at Syracuse, but I didn't mention that. Thank you. Is that all? John's smirk faltered. He exchanged glances with Linda, who looked equally puzzled by my composure. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't calm. I was done. There's a difference. Done with being the office mom who organized retirement parties and remembered everyone's birthdays. Done with watching mediocre men get promoted over me because they spoke louder in meetings. Done with having my ideas dismissed as too complex or not scalable by people who couldn't find the bathroom without a GPS. Well, John cleared his throat. We'd appreciate your help with the transition. The new team will need guidance on your systems. My systems? As if 16 years of building something from nothing could be casually handed over like a set of car keys. I'll consider it, I said, knowing I wouldn't. We shook hands. His palm was damp. Mine wasn't. 16 years earlier, Yardi Property Group was called Westchester Family Holdings, a mom-and-pop operation with 8 apartment buildings and a filing system that consisted of shoeboxes and prayer. Margaret Yardi, the founder's daughter, had inherited a company that was drowning in paperwork and losing tenants, faster than they could find new ones. We need someone who understands computers, Margaret had told me during my interview, and who won't judge us for being behind the times. I was 33, recently divorced, and desperate for stable work that would let me support Emma and build something meaningful. The job title was Assistant Property Manager, but what I really became was their digital architect. I started small, computerized the rent roll, created a tenant database, built a system for tracking maintenance requests that actually worked. Each improvement led to the next one. Each problem I solved revealed 3 more opportunities. By year 5, I'd integrated their accounting software with a custom tenant portal I'd cobbled together using 3 different platforms and my own creative workarounds. By year 10, our tenant retention rate was 40% higher than industry average, and other property management companies were asking Margaret how she'd done it. "It's all Carole," she'd tell them, beaming with pride. "She's a genius with this stuff." Margaret retired at 70, selling to a regional firm that kept me on because they were smart enough to recognize what I'd built. That firm got bought by a larger one, which eventually caught the attention of Apex Residential, a private equity group that specialized in what they called value optimization. Value optimization, another euphemism. This one meant strip out anything that costs money, including the people who make everything work. The warning signs had been building for months. New faces in expensive suits asking probing questions about legacy systems and redundant processes. Consultants with clipboards and tablets scribbling notes while I explained how our integrated platform handled everything from lease renewals to social media management. "It seems unnecessarily complex," one of them had said, studying my workflow charts like they were hieroglyphics. "There are off-the-shelf solutions that could handle this more efficiently." I tried to explain that efficient wasn't the same as effective, that our complex system was complex because property management was complex, because real people with real problems needed more than cookie-cutter responses. They'd nodded politely and written more notes. Last month, John Goldson arrived as VP of Operations, hired specifically to modernize our processes. He brought 3 junior staff members, all under 30, all eager to prove themselves by dismantling what I'd spent 16 years building. They'd shadow me, asking questions about database structures and email automation sequences. I'd answer patiently, the same way I'd always shared knowledge with new team members. What I didn't realize was that they weren't learning how to work with my systems. They were learning how to replace me. Carole's made herself indispensable by design, not necessity. I'd overheard John telling someone on a phone call last week, "It's a classic case of job security through opacity." Opacity. As if the only reason my systems worked was because I deliberately made them mysterious. I packed my personal items into a cardboard box that had once held printer paper. 16 years of work reduced to a few framed photos, a coffee mug Emma had made in 3rd grade pottery class, and the small, succulent plant that had somehow survived every office relocation and renovation. The office felt different already. Conversations stopped when I walked by. People studied their computer screens with unusual intensity. Nobody wanted to catch the disease of obsolescence by association. Jessica Chen, my assistant for the past 3 years, was the only one brave enough to approach my desk. "This is so wrong," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "You built this whole place. They have no idea what they're doing." "They'll figure it out," I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. Jessica was 28, smart, and ambitious. She'd learned more about our systems than anyone else, partly because she was genuinely interested, and partly because I'd made a point of teaching her. In a saner world, she'd be my successor. In John Goldson's world, she was just another expense to be optimized. "What am I supposed to do when the tenant portal crashes?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I closed the last drawer of my desk. "Call the help desk for whatever system they replace it with." "But they haven't replaced it yet. They're still evaluating options." Of course they were. John and his team had spent 3 months studying my work and concluded it was too complicated, but they hadn't bothered to build anything to take its place. They'd assumed that dismantling something was the same as improving it. "You'll be fine," I told Jessica, meaning it. She was smart enough to land somewhere better. "Just document everything. When things break, make sure there's a paper trail." I hugged her goodbye. A real hug, not the performative kind you give at office parties. She felt small and worried in my arms. Walking through the parking garage to my Honda Civic, I noticed how the concrete walls amplified every sound. My footsteps echoed. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance. The fluorescent lights cast everything in that sickly yellow glow that made even healthy people look like they were dying. My phone buzzed before I'd even reached the car. Text from Jessica. Everything's falling apart. Resident portal is down. I stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into my purse without responding. The drive from White Plains to Scarsdale took 23 minutes in light traffic. 23 minutes to process the end of 16 years and the beginning of whatever came next. I pulled into the driveway of my modest condo. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a small patch of grass that I pretended was a garden. It was half the size of the house I'd shared with Richard before the divorce, but it was mine. No one could take it away from me for being too expensive to maintain. The place felt different when I walked through the front door at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Quieter, emptier, like it knew I was supposed to be somewhere else. I set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter next to a stack of unopened bills and Emma's latest care package request from college. Protein bars, nail files, and money for textbooks. The essentials of a sophomore engineering major who'd inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's talent for expensive hobbies. My phone buzzed again. Then again. John Goldson. Could use your input on the tenant communication system. Having some technical difficulties. Linda Martinez. Hi, Carole. Hope your first day of transition is going well. John mentioned you might be available for consulting work. Unknown number. This is Mark from Apex IT. We're experiencing some issues with your email automation sequences. Could you walk us through the setup? I poured myself a glass of wine, a decent Pinot Grigio that had been a gift from a grateful property owner last Christmas, and sat on my small deck overlooking the neighbor's perfectly manicured lawn. The October air carried the smell of burning leaves and the distant sound of someone's leaf blower. Suburban sounds. Middle-class sounds. The sounds of people who went to work every day and came home every night and didn't worry about being optimized out of existence. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Emma, calling from Syracuse. Mom! Her voice was bright and energetic, the way it always was when she had good news to share. I just got my midterm grades back, and I aced differential equations. Professor Morrison said I had the most elegant solution in the class. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I tried to match her enthusiasm, but something in my voice must have given me away. What's wrong? You sound weird. I could have lied. Could have said I was just tired, or fighting off a cold, or dealing with traffic. But Emma was 20 years old and smart enough to see through maternal deflection. I got laid off today. Silence on the other end. Then, what? But you're like the most important person there. You built everything. Apparently, that made me expensive. Those idiots? Emma's voice went flat and angry, the same tone she'd used at 8 years old when kids at school were mean to her friends. Do they have any idea what they just did? I sipped my wine and watched a cardinal land on the neighbor's bird feeder. Not yet, but they will. We talked for another 20 minutes. Emma offered to come home, offered to take out more student loans, offered to find a part-time job to help with expenses. I deflected all of it gently but firmly. This was my problem to solve, not hers. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and listened to my phone buzz with increasingly desperate messages from Yardy. Each notification felt like a small victory, a tiny crack in John Goldson's confidence, but it wasn't revenge I was feeling. Not yet. It was something else. Something that felt like possibility. For 16 years, I'd been so busy keeping their systems running that I'd never stopped to think about what I could build if I wasn't constantly fixing other people's mistakes. What I could create if I had the freedom to do things right from the start. What I could accomplish if someone finally saw me as valuable instead of expensive. My phone buzzed one more time. Jessica again. The automated rent reminders aren't working. John's freaking out. Says we need you back by Friday. I finished my wine and went inside to make dinner. Something simple. Pasta with garlic and olive oil, a salad from the bag of greens that was about to expire. While the water boiled, I opened my laptop and started updating my LinkedIn profile. It had been years since I'd looked for work, years since I'd had to think about my professional worth in terms that strangers would understand. Senior Marketing Operations Manager with 16 plus years building integrated customer retention systems. Expert in multi-platform automation, tenant communication workflows, and data-driven retention strategies. It sounded impressive when I wrote it down. More impressive than office mom who keeps everything running. I was about to close the laptop when a notification popped up. A LinkedIn message from someone named Judy McLean. Hi, Carole. I saw the news about Yardi. I've been following your work for years. What you built there is legendary in our industry. I'd love to buy you coffee and discuss some opportunities. I think you'd be interested in what we're building at Hudson Valley Residential. I stared at the message for a long time. Following my work for years. Legendary in our industry. When was the last time someone at Yardi had used words like that about me? When had anyone there talked about my work as something worth following, worth admiring, worth anything more than a line item on a budget spreadsheet? I clicked reply and started typing. Coffee sounds perfect. When works for you? The coffee shop in downtown White Plains had the kind of artisanal pretension that charged $7 for a latte and called it craft. But Judy McLean had chosen it, and after 16 years of break room instant coffee, I figured I could handle a little overpriced ambiance. Judy arrived exactly on time, which I appreciated. She was tall, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, with silver-streaked brown hair, pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably took 20 minutes to achieve. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and when she looked at me, she actually saw me. Not the invisible middle-aged woman John Goldson had dismissed, but someone worth her full attention. I've been following your work since the Westchester Property Management Conference 3 years ago, she said, settling into her chair with a confidence I envied. That presentation on integrated tenant communication, it was brilliant. I went back to my office and completely restructured our resident services because of what you shared. I remembered that conference. I'd presented my retention framework to a half-empty room while the major sessions drew crowds. John hadn't even bothered to attend. Thank you. That means more than you know. What Yardi did is their loss and our opportunity. Judy leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of energy I recognized from my early days building systems. Hudson Valley Residential is growing fast. We've got 28 properties across 3 counties, but we're hitting the same scalability problems you solved years ago. She pulled out her phone and showed me their occupancy rates, tenant satisfaction scores, maintenance response times. All decent numbers, but I could see the places where the seams were showing. We need someone who understands that property management isn't just about collecting rent, she continued. It's about creating communities, building relationships, making people feel valued, not just processed. Making people feel valued. When was the last time I'd felt that at work? What exactly are you proposing? Chief of Resident Experience. It's a new position we're creating. Full control over tenant communications, retention programs, community building initiatives. 25% more than you were making at Yardi, plus equity stake, plus a budget to build whatever systems you think we need. I sipped my overpriced latte and studied her face for signs of corporate doublespeak. But Judy's enthusiasm felt real, unfiltered by the careful language of executives who've been burned by their own promises. Why now? I asked. Why not 6 months ago? She laughed, a sound that was both rueful and knowing. Because 6 months ago, I thought I could figure it out myself. I'm good at real estate, good at finance, good at expansion strategies. But tenant retention? Community building? I'm discovering that's an art form, and I'm not the artist. It's not art. It's just paying attention. Exactly. And I suspect you've been paying attention for a very long time. We talked for 2 hours about tenant psychology and the difference between customer service and customer experience, about the way property management had become so focused on efficiency that it forgot about humanity, about building systems that could scale without losing the personal touch that kept people happy. By the time we parted ways, I had a job offer, a start date, and something I hadn't felt in months: excitement. My phone had been buzzing constantly during our coffee meeting. 17 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and a growing stack of increasingly frantic text messages. John Goldson. Urgent. Need to discuss consulting arrangement. Call ASAP. Jessica. Rent reminders completely down. Residents calling nonstop. Help. Linda Martinez. Board wants to know timeline for system restoration. Please advise. Unknown number. This is Kevin from Apex IT. We need your documentation for the email automation workflows immediately. I deleted them all and drove home through the autumn afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in years. That evening, I called Emma to tell her about the job offer. Mom, that's amazing. See? I told you those idiots at Yardy didn't know what they were doing. Language, I said automatically, though my heart wasn't in the scolding. Sorry, those intellectually challenged individuals at Yardy didn't know what they were doing. I laughed, despite myself. Better. So, when do you start? Monday. Judy wants to move fast. Good. You've been invisible there for too long. Time to go somewhere they actually see you. Invisible. My 20-year-old daughter had summed up 16 years of corporate life in one word. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started mapping out ideas for Hudson Valley's Resident Experience Program. For the first time in years, I was thinking about possibilities instead of limitations. My phone buzzed. John Goldson again. This time I answered. John. Carole, thank God. We have a crisis. The entire tenant communication system is down. Email sequences, automated reminders, renewal notifications. Nothing's working. We need you back. I'm employed elsewhere now. Silence. Then, what do you mean, employed elsewhere? I mean, I have a job. Exclusive contract. I can't help you. We'll match whatever they're paying you, plus a signing bonus. I thought about 16 years of being taken for granted, of having my ideas dismissed, of watching lesser minds get promoted over me because they were cheaper or louder or more willing to play politics. It's not about the money, John. Then what is it about? Revenge? No. It's about finally working somewhere that values experience over expense accounts. The line went quiet except for the sound of John's heavy breathing. This is serious, Carole. We're hemorrhaging residents. The board is asking questions. Then you should probably figure out how to fix your systems. You know we can't figure them out. You built them to be indecipherable. There it was. The accusation I'd been waiting for. John, let me explain something to you, I said, my voice steady and cold. Those systems aren't complicated because I wanted job security. They're complicated because property management is complicated, because real people have real problems that can't be solved with off-the-shelf software and junior coordinators who think automation is the same as relationship building. You have consultants who are trying to reverse engineer 16 years of institutional knowledge in 3 weeks. Good luck with that. I hung up and turned off my phone. My first day at Hudson Valley Residential felt like stepping into an alternate universe where middle-aged women were actually listened to in meetings. The office was smaller than Yardy's, housed in a converted Victorian mansion in Tarrytown. My office, my actual office, with a door and a window, overlooked the Hudson River. No gray cubicle walls, No fluorescent lighting, no background hum of people pretending to be busy. Judy introduced me to the team with genuine enthusiasm. This is Carole Cohen, our new chief of resident experience. She's the genius who built that legendary tenant retention system at Yardi. Genius. Legendary. Words that had never been applied to my work before. The staff was small, but engaged. Maria Santos handled leasing, Tom Kim managed maintenance operations, and Sarah Brennan ran the books. All of them seemed genuinely interested in what I might bring to their operation. We've been trying to improve our resident satisfaction scores, Maria explained during my first team meeting, but we're not sure where to focus our efforts. I spent the morning reviewing their current processes, talking to team members, studying their tenant feedback data. By afternoon, I had a preliminary assessment. You're doing a lot of things right, I told Judy over lunch. Your maintenance response times are excellent. Your properties are well maintained. Your leasing process is efficient. But you're missing the emotional piece. Emotional piece? The difference between a tenant and a resident. Between someone who pays rent and someone who calls a place home. I pulled out my notebook and showed her the retention framework I'd been developing since our coffee meeting. Welcome campaigns for new residents, birthday cards, community events, follow-up surveys that actually get read and acted on, a social media presence that showcases the community, not just the amenities, systems that remember what matters to people and make them feel seen. Judy studied my diagrams with the same intensity she'd probably once applied to balance sheets. How long to implement this? Full program? 6 months, but we can start seeing results in 30 days. Do it. That afternoon, I began building something new, not fixing someone else's broken system, not maintaining someone else's vision, but creating from scratch with resources and support and trust. It felt like breathing again. The networking event was Judy's idea. Westchester Women in Business Monthly Mixer, she'd said. Good for making connections, even better for seeing how the competition is doing. I almost said no. After 16 years of corporate events where I smiled and nodded while men explained my own job to me, the thought of more networking made my skin crawl. But something made me change my mind. Maybe it was the new business cards with my actual title instead of some diminishing euphemism. Maybe it was curiosity about what it felt like to represent a company that actually valued what I did. The event was held at a wine bar in Scarsdale, close enough to home that I could walk if needed. I arrived fashionably late, not because I was trying to make an entrance, but because I'd spent 20 minutes changing clothes and talking myself out of leaving. The room buzzed with conversation, punctuated by laughter and the clink of wine glasses. I recognized a few faces from industry conferences, property managers, and real estate agents I'd worked with over the years. Carole? Carole Cohen? I turned to find David Rosen approaching with 2 glasses of wine and a smile that reached his eyes. I knew him vaguely. He'd handled some legal work for Yardi a few years back, something about lease compliance. But I remembered him being different from most of the attorneys we dealt with. He listened more than he talked, asked smart questions, treated support staff with the same respect he showed executives. David, good to see you. Likewise. I heard about Yardi. Their loss, I'm sure. He handed me one of the wine glasses. A decent Pinot Grigio, not the cheap stuff usually served at these events. Actually, it's been liberating, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Career change at our age usually is. He was probably 50-something, with gray at his temples and smile lines that suggested he'd learned not to take himself too seriously. Are you staying in property management? Just started at Hudson Valley Residential. Chief of Resident Experience. Chief of... Now that's a title that actually means something. What does a Chief of Resident Experience do? And then something magical happened. He asked me about my work. Really asked, with follow-up questions and genuine interest, and I found myself talking about tenant psychology and community building and the art of making people feel valued in an increasingly automated world. We talked through 2 glasses of wine and an appetizer plate that appeared from somewhere. About his divorce 2 years ago, about my daughter at college, about the peculiar challenges of starting over in your 50s. "You want to know the strangest part about divorce?" he said, leaning against the bar. "It's not the loneliness or the financial stuff. It's rediscovering who you are when nobody expects you to be somebody else's version of yourself." I thought about John Goldson's dismissive smirk, about 16 years of being the office mom who kept everything running but never got credit for it. "I know exactly what you mean." By the time the event wound down, we'd exchanged business cards and tentative plans to continue the conversation over dinner. Walking home through the tree-lined streets of Scarsdale, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. Not just professional possibility, but personal. The sense that life might have more chapters to write. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It was great talking with you tonight. Would you be interested in dinner Friday? Somewhere with better wine and worse networking. David." I typed back, "Sounds perfect." 3 weeks into my tenure at Hudson Valley, Jessica finally called. "I can't take it anymore," she said without preamble. "Everything's falling apart, and John keeps blaming the legacy systems like they designed themselves to be difficult." I was in my office, looking out at the Hudson River, while Maria briefed me on resident feedback from our first community event, a fall festival that had drawn twice the expected attendance. "How bad is it?" "Bad. The automated lease renewal sequence hasn't worked since you left. We're having to call every resident individually, and half of them are annoyed because they think we forgot about them. The maintenance request system crashed last week, and the consultants are saying they need to rebuild it from scratch." "What did John say about that?" Jessica's laugh was bitter. "He said you must have sabotaged something before you left. I told him that was impossible because I watched you pack your personal stuff, and you didn't even touch your computer." Sabotaged. The same accusation Victor had faced in my source material. The assumption that competence looks like sabotage to people who don't understand it. "Jess, can I give you some advice?" "Please." "Document everything. Every system failure, every consultant recommendation, every excuse John gives for why things aren't working. Keep copies at home." "Why?" "Because this isn't going to end well for anybody, and you don't want to go down with that ship." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Carole, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you hiring?" I looked across the office at our growing team, at the energy and enthusiasm that came from working somewhere that valued what you brought instead of what you cost. "Send me your resume," I said. The first domino fell exactly 4 weeks after I'd started at Hudson Valley. I was reviewing our resident satisfaction scores, up 12% from the previous quarter, when Judy knocked on my office door. "You might want to see this," she said, holding up her phone. Westchester Business Journal just posted something about Yardy. The headline read, "Local Property Management Company Faces Resident Revolt Over Service Failures." The article detailed system outages, missed maintenance requests, and a growing list of residents threatening to break their leases over communication failures. One resident was quoted as saying, "It's like they forgot we exist." They forgot we exist. 16 years of building relationships, creating touch points, making people feel valued, and John Goldson had managed to destroy it all in a month. "There's more," Judy said, scrolling down. 3 of their premium properties just announced they're switching management companies, including Westchester Commons. Westchester Commons was Yardy's crown jewel, 180 luxury units that generated nearly 20% of their revenue. I developed their entire resident experience program, from the welcome packages to the quarterly appreciation events. My phone rang. John Goldson. I let it go to voicemail but played the message on speaker. "Carole, please. I know you're angry, but this has gone too far. The board is talking about bankruptcy. We need your help. Name your price. Anything." The desperation in his voice was almost pitiable. Almost. "Are you going to call him back?" Judy asked. I deleted the message. "No, but I'm going to make some phone calls." "To who?" I smiled, thinking about all those office mom relationships John had never bothered to understand. The assistant property managers who'd learned their jobs from me. The maintenance supervisors who trusted my judgment. The leasing agents who'd seen my retention programs work. To people who might be interested in bringing their properties somewhere, they'll be valued. By the end of the day, I had preliminary conversations with 4 property owners currently managed by Yardi. By the end of the week, 2 of them had requested formal proposals from Hudson Valley. John called 6 more times. I didn't answer any of them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something better and letting the results speak for themselves. The call came on a Thursday morning in February, 6 months after I'd started at Hudson Valley. I was reviewing resident satisfaction surveys. Our scores had climbed to 94%, industry-leading numbers that had caught the attention of property management trade publications, when Judy knocked on my office door. "I just got off the phone with Marcus Chen at Apex Residential," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "They want to meet." Marcus Chen was the managing partner at the private equity firm that owned Yardi. I'd never met him, but I'd heard enough about him to know that when Marcus Chen wanted to meet, it wasn't for coffee and small talk. About what? Judy's smile was the kind you see on poker players with royal flushes. They want to discuss a strategic partnership. Apparently, they're having some operational challenges with their Westchester portfolio. Operational challenges. Corporate euphemism for everything is on fire and we don't know how to put it out. Meaning Yardi. Marcus says they're looking for an experienced regional partner to help stabilize their assets before they explore their options. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. Their options being sale, liquidation, or finding someone who actually knows how to run a property management company. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd been the expensive employee they couldn't afford to keep. Now I was part of the team they wanted to help clean up the mess they'd made. When do they want to meet? Tomorrow. Their office is in Manhattan. Marcus specifically requested that you attend. I spent that evening preparing for the meeting with the same methodical approach I'd once used to build tenant retention programs. Research on Apex's portfolio, financial analysis of Yardi's declining performance, preliminary thoughts on what it would take to turn things around. David came over for dinner, a routine we'd fallen into over the past few months, and found me surrounded by spreadsheets and property management reports. "Big day tomorrow?" he asked, opening a bottle of the Pinot Grigio we both favored. "Could be. Remember that company I used to work for? The one that decided I was too expensive?" The intellectually challenged individuals, as Emma calls them. I laughed. "Those are the ones. Turns out they need help fixing what they broke." David studied my face over his wine glass. "How do you feel about that?" It was a good question. 6 months ago, the answer would have been anger, resentment, a desire to watch them fail. But 6 months of building something meaningful had changed my perspective. Honestly, I feel sorry for them, for the residents who are suffering because of their incompetence, for the employees who are scrambling to fix problems they didn't create. And for yourself? I thought about it. I feel ready to show them what they threw away. The Apex offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of sterile corporate environment where people wore $1,000 suits and spoke in quarterly projections instead of human language. Marcus Chen was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the intense energy of someone who'd built his career on finding value in broken companies. He greeted Judy and me in a conference room overlooking Central Park, flanked by 2 associates who looked like they'd graduated from business school last week. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, gesturing for us to sit. I'll be direct. The Westchester portfolio is hemorrhaging money. Occupancy rates are down 18%, maintenance costs are up 30%, and we're facing a class action lawsuit from residents over service failures. Service failures. Not system failures or management failures, but service failures, as if the problem was attitude rather than competence. We've reviewed Hudson Valley's performance metrics. One of the associates added, consulting his tablet, "Your resident satisfaction scores, retention rates, operational efficiency, they're industry leading. We'd like to discuss a management transition for the Yardy properties." "What kind of transition?" Judy asked. Marcus leaned forward. "Full operational control of all 63 properties, with an option to acquire the portfolio at fair market value after you've stabilized operations." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was calculating. 63 properties, nearly 4,000 residential units, triple Hudson Valley's current size, plus the opportunity to acquire assets at distressed pricing. "What's the timeline?" I asked. "Immediate transition of management responsibilities." 6 months to demonstrate improved performance metrics. After that, we'll discuss acquisition terms. "And the current management team?" Marcus exchanged glances with his associates. "That would be part of the transition discussion." Translation. John Goldson and his team were already gone, or would be soon. We spent 2 hours reviewing financial data, property conditions, and operational challenges. Every problem Marcus described was something I'd predicted, warned about, or tried to prevent during my final months at Yardy. The backup system failures that corrupted resident data because proper redundancies had been cut as unnecessary complexity. The automated renewal sequence that crashed because the consultants couldn't understand the integration between platforms. The maintenance request system that collapsed because it required constant calibration that only I had understood. "One more question," I said as the meeting wound down. "Why us? Why not bring in one of the big national management companies?" Marcus smiled for the first time all morning. "Because we tried that. 3 different firms. They all said the same thing. The existing systems are too complex to integrate with their standard platforms. They'd need to rebuild everything from scratch, which would take 18 months and cost more than the properties are worth. But you think we can do it? I think you built it the first time. You probably know how to fix it." The transition happened faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, Hudson Valley had operational control of all former Yardy properties. Within a month, we'd restored basic system functionality and started addressing the backlog of resident complaints. I found myself back in the building where I'd worked for 16 years, but this time as VP of Integrated Operations, instead of dismissed employee. My new office was larger than John's had been, with a view of the parking garage where I'd walked to my car in defeat 6 months earlier. The first day was surreal, walking through hallways where I'd been invisible, nodding to former colleagues who now worked for me, reviewing reports on systems I'd built with my own hands. Jessica was waiting in my office when I arrived that morning, holding a coffee mug and wearing a smile I hadn't seen since before the layoffs. "Welcome back, boss," she said. "Boss?" "Director of Resident Communications. Judy said you requested me specifically for the transition team." I had. Jessica was smart, loyal, and more importantly, she understood both the technical systems and the human relationships that made everything work. "What happened to everyone else?" I asked. "Most of the junior staff stayed on. A few of the managers took positions with other companies." She paused. "John Goldson was terminated 3 weeks ago." I waited to feel satisfaction, vindication, some sense of justice served. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. John had never understood what he was trying to manage, and that ignorance had cost him everything. "What about the consultants?" Jessica's smile turned wicked. Apex fired them after they submitted a bill for $2 million and a recommendation to implement legacy system replacement protocols. Their exact words. We spent the morning reviewing the property portfolios, identifying the most critical system failures, prioritizing repairs based on resident impact. It felt like performing surgery on a patient I'd once helped build, familiar but somehow fragile after months of neglect. The work was exhausting, but satisfying in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Not just fixing problems, but fixing them properly. With adequate resources, proper documentation, and a team that understood the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. 3 months into the integration, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the server room, my old domain, now properly climate-controlled and organized, when one of the security guards called up. "Miss Cohen?" "There's a John Goldson here to see you. Says he used to work here." I almost said no. What would be the point? But curiosity won. John was waiting in the lobby, looking older than his 38 years. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his designer glasses slightly askew. The confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by something that looked like defeat. "Carole, thank you for seeing me." I nodded toward the small conference room off the lobby. Neutral territory. "What can I do for you, John?" He sat heavily in the chair across from me, running his hands through hair that needed cutting. I wanted to apologize. For how things ended. For the things I said. Apology accepted. He looked surprised, like he'd expected anger or recrimination. I've been thinking a lot about what went wrong. About the assumptions I made. And what did you conclude? That I didn't understand what you built. Not just the technical systems, but the relationships, the institutional knowledge, the way you'd woven everything together so it actually worked for the people who lived there. I waited for him to continue. I thought I could replicate it with cheaper labor and better technology. I was wrong. Yes, you were. He flinched slightly at my directness, but nodded. I heard you're doing amazing work with the integration. Occupancy rates back up, resident satisfaction through the roof. The trade publications are calling it a turnaround miracle. It's not a miracle. It's just doing things right. John was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. I can't find work. Every firm I interview with has heard about what happened here, about how the systems collapsed after you left. They ask me to explain it, and I don't know how to answer. I felt a flicker of sympathy for him, but kept my voice neutral. What do you want from me, John? I don't know. A reference, maybe? Some way to explain that I learned from my mistakes? I thought about 16 years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as expendable. About the residents who'd suffered during the months of system failures. About Jessica and the other employees who'd watched their workplace crumble because of decisions made in boardrooms by people who'd never bothered to understand what they were managing. I can't give you a reference for work you never learned how to do, I said finally. But I can tell you this. If you want to rebuild your career, start by learning what you should have learned before you started tearing things down. John nodded slowly. How do I do that? The same way I did. From the ground up. Take an entry-level job somewhere and actually learn how property management works, how systems connect, how relationships matter, how you build something that lasts instead of something that looks good in quarterly reports. He stood to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, I know what I cost the company. What I cost you. You didn't cost me anything, John. You freed me to build something better. The acquisition closed on a warm day in late September. Hudson Valley. Residential officially purchased the entire Yardi portfolio for 60% of its assessed value 2 years earlier. A deal that made us the largest property management company north of New York City. That evening, Judy threw a celebration party at a restaurant in Tarrytown, overlooking the Hudson River. The entire team was there, plus spouses, partners, and a few industry colleagues who'd watched our improbable rise with interest. I sat at a table with David, Emma, who'd driven down from Syracuse for the occasion, and Maria and Tom from our original team. The conversation flowed as freely as the wine, punctuated by laughter and the kind of relaxed camaraderie that comes from people who genuinely enjoy working together. "Speech!" someone called out as Judy stood to address the room. "I'm not good at speeches," Judy began, which got a laugh because everyone knew she was excellent at them. "But I want to say something about what we've accomplished this year." She gestured toward me. 18 months ago, a certain property management company made what they thought was a smart financial decision. They decided that experience was too expensive, that institutional knowledge was expendable, that relationships could be replaced with algorithms. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. They were wrong on every count, and their mistake became our opportunity to prove that there's still value in doing things right, in treating people, residents, and employees like human beings instead of line items. More applause. I felt my cheeks warming, partly from the wine and partly from the recognition. "But mostly," Judy continued, "I want to thank Carole Cohen for showing all of us that being undervalued doesn't mean being without value. Sometimes it just means you're in the wrong place." The applause was longer this time, accompanied by raised glasses and calls of "Here, here." I stood briefly to acknowledge it, then sat back down, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of being seen and appreciated for exactly who I was. Later, as the party wound down, David and I walked along the river path behind the restaurant. The September air carried the promise of autumn, and the lights from the city across the water reflected in gentle ripples. "Proud of you," he said, taking my hand. "For what?" "For not letting them make you smaller. For building something better instead of just getting even." I thought about John Goldson's visit, about the choice between vindication and revenge, between building up and tearing down. "It wasn't about them," I said finally. "It was about me. About proving to myself that I had value, even when nobody else could see it." We walked in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water lap against the shore. "So what's next?" David asked. "Next? You've conquered property management in Westchester County, saved the company, rescued the residents, proved all the doubters wrong. What do you do for an encore?" I smiled, thinking about the conversations I'd been having with Judy about expansion into other markets, about the mentorship program we were developing for women transitioning careers in midlife, about all the systems we still had to build and improve. "More of the same," I said, "but better." 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Westchester Business Women's Annual Luncheon, looking out at 200 faces that included former colleagues, industry competitors, and journalists from the local business press. The keynote invitation had come as a surprise. "Invisible to Indispensable, a Transformation Story," they'd called it. The title made me cringe a little. Too neat, too clean for the messy reality of career reinvention. But the opportunity to share what I'd learned felt important. "How many of you have ever been told you're too expensive?" I began, which got knowing laughter from the audience. "How many have watched younger, cheaper colleagues get promoted over you? How many have had your ideas dismissed as too complex by people who couldn't implement them if their careers depended on it?" Hands went up throughout the room, not tentatively, but with the conviction of shared experience. I spent 16 years building something I was proud of, only to be told that my experience was a liability instead of an asset, that my institutional knowledge was unnecessary complexity, that 2 junior coordinators could do my job for half the cost. I paused, looking out at faces that reflected my own story back to me. They were wrong. Not because junior coordinators can't be valuable, They absolutely can, but because experience and wisdom and the ability to see connections between things that seem unrelated, those aren't expenses. They're investments. I talked about the importance of documenting invisible labor, of quantifying the work that goes unnoticed until it's not being done, about the difference between being indispensable and being irreplaceable, between building job security through competence versus complexity. But mostly, I said, wrapping up, I want to tell you that being undervalued doesn't mean being without value. Sometimes it just means you're in the wrong place, working for the wrong people, accepting too little for what you bring to the table. The applause was warm and sustained. During the question and answer session, women shared their own stories of age discrimination, career pivots, and the challenge of proving their worth in workplaces that seemed determined to overlook it. Afterward, as I worked the room accepting congratulations and exchanging business cards, I spotted a familiar face near the back of the ballroom. Jessica Chen, now Jessica Chen Martinez after her wedding 6 months earlier, approached with a huge smile and a business card. I wanted you to see this, she said, handing me the card. Chen Martinez Consulting, Property Management Systems Integration. You started your own company? Your mentorship program inspired me. Plus, apparently there are a lot of property management companies out there with unnecessarily complex systems that need someone who actually understands them. I hugged her, feeling the same pride I'd once felt watching Emma master differential equations, or David win a difficult case. I'm proud of you. I learned from the best, she said. By the way, I got a call last week from a company in Connecticut. They heard about what we did with the Yardi integration. They want to know if we can help them with a similar situation. We? Jessica grinned. I was hoping you might be interested in some consulting work. Chen Martinez could use a senior partner. I thought about it. The opportunity to take what we'd learned and apply it elsewhere, to help other companies avoid the mistakes that had nearly destroyed Yardi, to build systems that lasted instead of just looking good in presentations. Send me the details, I said. That evening, I sat on my deck overlooking the neighbor's yard, sipping wine and watching the sunset paint the autumn leaves in shades of gold and crimson. David was grilling something that smelled amazing, humming off key to whatever was playing on his phone. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, now a senior at Syracuse, with job offers from 3 different engineering firms. Saw the live stream of your speech, Mom. You killed it. So proud of you for showing them what they lost. I typed back, Thanks, sweetheart. Turns out the best revenge is living well. And building something better? And building something better. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes, listening to the familiar suburban sounds of dinner time. Lawnmowers in the distance, children playing in someone's backyard, the gentle sizzle of whatever David was cooking. 2 years ago, I'd been the invisible woman whose 16 years of work could fit in a cardboard box. Tonight, I was the keynote speaker at business conferences, the senior partner in a consulting firm, the woman who'd turned her dismissal into her greatest professional triumph. But more than that, I was someone who'd learned the difference between being valued and being valuable. Someone who discovered that the best response to being underestimated isn't anger or revenge. It's building something so undeniably good that the results speak for themselves. Sometimes the last laugh isn't about getting even with the people who wronged you. Sometimes it's about proving to yourself and showing everyone else exactly what they threw away. Dinner's ready, David called from the deck. I opened my eyes, stood up, and walked toward the warmth and light of whatever came next.